Hello everyone, thank you so much. Look at this crowd. Thank you guys so much for coming out to my presentation. My name is John Owsley and I am so excited to be here today. Last year I gave a Student Scholar Days presentation on marijuana sales tax revenue in Colorado, and it was really so that I can get students kind of excited about tax law. So marijuana, maybe that would spark some interest. This year, something I'm very interested in. So what I did is I found a project that marries my interest in taxation law as well as more of my passion for legislative affairs. And it's also really close to home, quite literally, in Colorado. So this is my presentation on the Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights, its history, how it works, and how it's affected our state in the past 26 years, and how to reform it. So to start off, we'll just say that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is a constitutional amendment to the state of Colorado. And it was passed in 1992. And to remember anything about it, basically is there's two provisions. The first is being that there's all tax increases must be voted on by the people, which doesn't sound completely outlandish. The second is any excess revenues over the TABOR limits must be refunded back to the taxpayers. So I mostly will focus on the excess revenues because that's what's really has harmed our state, but I will just quickly touch on the all tax increases. So since this has happened in 26 years, there's only been 2 tax increases that have passed in statewide, and that was on cigarettes and marijuana. So both sin taxes, and what's happening is both of them, just typically, people aren't very subject as legislators to increase taxes because people get frustrated by it, as well as the way that TABOR reads is every time you put something on the ballot, it has to read, shall taxes increase by $4 billion. And what happens is taxpayers get sticker shocked by how much it would be, and they end up not voting yes on the amendment. So let's actually go into the revenues and find out a little bit more of the figures. So between 1997 and 2001, those were some peak years for Colorado. Over $3 billion were given back to the citizens of Colorado, and not the citizens, the taxpayers. What that looks like is when you do your tax return, you'll get back a certain amount. So it could be anywhere from $16 to $100. In 2019, it's projected that we're going to lose $340 million over the tax limits. And how did this all happen? So there's one very persistent individual, and everyone call him Douglas Bruce, but they call him Mr. Tabor because he's the person behind TABOR. And what I like to tell myself is, first of all, in November, when Donald Trump got elected president, I said, if Donald Trump can get elected president, I can do anything. And now, after this, if Douglas Cruz can pass TABOR, I can do anything, because it's an amazing story. But Douglas Cruz came from Southern California, and he grew up in Southern California, got a business degree, and then got a law degree after that. In the late 70s, he moved to Colorado Springs because he was trying to find somewhere where he wanted to call home, and he found that they were fairly conservative. I think he would have liked it to be even more conservative, and he loved the mountains. So he came to Colorado, and that's where he actually met John and Diana Cox. John and Diana Cox were farmers in Palisade, and what they did is in 1986, they really wanted to do an anti-tax amendment. So they were doing their own type of coalition, and Douglas Bruce found out about it, joined them, and quickly the entire coalition realized this person should be our leader. He's well-spoken, he's an attorney, he knows what he's talking about, and so he went back after one of the first meetings and wrote the first version of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So in 1988, they went to the ballot and they tried to do it, and it failed, and there's actually a famous speech of him going to Colorado and saying, all of you are idiots because you did not pass my bill, and called out everyone. In 1990, he lost by 2%, so it was 49% for and 51% against. Also very frustrated, and the whole coalition was thinking, we're done, let's just stop. He said, third time's a charm, please stick with me, let's go for it. And in 1992, they changed the campaign a little bit more. So what they did is they focused on that first part of it. All taxes must be increased by the votes of the people. That's a pretty fair thing where people are thinking, this is my money, I want to have a voice in whether or not it should be spent. And so they focused on that, and after it got passed, there was even legislators that didn't know everything that was inside TABOR. He went to the legislation and basically said, you have to do this now, this now, this now, and people were just starstruck. So I will say as well, former Governor Rory Romer said, every rational bone in my body says this is a very, very bad mistake. You're going to rip the quality out of Colorado. So he actually gave 9 speeches before this passed in 1992 saying, please don't vote on it. What ended up happening is even that was as much he could put time towards, because there was a Colorado Supreme Court case on LGBT issues at the same time, which most of the Democrats were focusing on instead of TABOR. So that's how they were a little bit distracted. People were getting misinformation about it's just having to do with tax increases, and it passed. So he was correct, but I'll get into how it was affected TABOR in a moment. First of all, let's find out how TABOR works. So the first thing to know is the formula. What it is the prior year's budget or spending plus inflation and population growth. So for example, if the population grows by 2% and inflation grows by 1%, then we're able to grow from those limits by 3%. First of all, this formulation is a tad broken because I've been learning from Professor Glenn, thank you by the way, about economics, and what he put in TABOR is that the inflation is based off the consumer price index, which is basically a basket of goods that consumers purchase. Bouncy balls, milk, bread, eggs, instead of public goods like roads, public education, higher education, healthcare. And so first of all, the formula is broken in that sense. The second thing is the ratchet effect. And the ratchet effect is how great, has just greatly affected our economy in Colorado. And this is because the way I like to look at it is all economies fluctuate. So when we go up, typically sometimes we'll go down, we'll come back up. So let's imagine in the Clinton years, around late 90s, we were doing pretty well, but in 2001, when the dot-com bubble burst, we went down in a recession. When we come back out of that recession, because of TABOR, we're down here because of our prior year budget, we can increase by inflation and population growth, so we're up to here. But if the economy comes back to where we were prior, we're way up here, and all of the excess has to be refunded back to the taxpayers. So now we're at this lower level until something happens, until there's legislation that's put into place. Hopefully you stayed with that. So how's that affecting Colorado? I try to think of a lot of different things. There's obviously the entire state budget went down, but these are two things that I felt like students would be more, it would relate to them. So first is public education. And what it's caused is that we went from 35th in the nation in 1992 to 49th in the nation in K through 12 spending. I don't know exactly where we are now, but I'm sure it can't be any better. Public education has suffered not only by TABOR, but also by an amendment that was passed 10 years before TABOR called the Gallagher Amendment. And it's actually the perfect team to really screw over public education. Because what happened is in 1982, sorry, okay, the first one. We passed the Gallagher Amendment, which basically means that all commercial property and residential property have to be at a 55-45 split. So the 55% is fixed and the 45% is variable. When it first was enacted, the commercial properties were fixed at 29% and we were at 21% over here. But because we're at a 45, it's under 50%, this is variable. So whenever the increase of value in homes increases, compared to commercial properties, it will decrease the number of the assessment rate. So that means less property taxes going in. And public education really gets funded by two ways. Multiple ways, but the two main ways are state funding and residential property taxes. So as you can see, this continued to decline over the years, and what ended up happening is we started getting more commercial property. So to hold the split, what we should do is start increasing our assessment rate for the residential properties. But it didn't happen because of, in 1992, we passed TABOR. So if we wanted to increase that, we would have to have a vote of the people. And it didn't happen. So since, 2003, we've been at the same assessment rate for public housing, and just recently it actually went down to 7.2%, which means that's less funding for public education. The next thing I want to talk about is higher education. When I first became a student trustee, Azrael Mandrigal was the previous student trustee, and she said the one thing you should know is TABOR, because it is a hot button issue, and this is how we're getting funded by the state. So what's been happening is in higher education, between 1990 and 2005, we've actually dropped 50% of state's funding. After that, we also are now 48th in the nation for higher education funding. So the way that TABOR works is it's a pie chart. And there's certain public goods that we just can't not give to the people. So there's healthcare, there's certain things, and higher education, I believe, is around 7% right now of this pie chart. Well, because our budget keeps going down, we might be the first state to actually not fund higher education at all. It might get to that point if we get lower and lower with TABOR. That is, people are believing that we might be the first state to not fund higher education at all. So let's talk about how to repeal and reform it. The last thing is, let's start with reforming. This is a really interesting term, Douglas Bruce, debrucing. So to debruce an amendment, it basically means that it's initiatives that help us retain the excess revenues instead of refunding it to the people. And the most famous debrucing amendment was Referendum C that was passed in 2005. And what it basically did is Bill Owens, who was the governor of Colorado at the time, he was a Republican, people felt like he was going to go on to be president. He was a good-looking guy, people loved him, and he ran on the platform saying he will never increase taxes. What happened is he started realizing that TABOR was so harmful to the state, especially after the 2001 recession, that we had to do something about it. So they put on the ballot that for 5 years, we will be able to keep those revenues in Colorado. And thank God that that happened, because in 2008, if we would have hit the recession while we still had TABOR, we would be at such a low TABOR limit that it would be ridiculous. But overall, I just want to do a shout out to him, because after that, his political career was basically in ruins, because people felt like he didn't increase taxes. Even though he didn't, it was just a refund to the people. So now he never became president, and here we are. Finally, let's talk a little bit about how to repeal TABOR. So if you can imagine being in 1992 as a legislator, this citizen, this random guy who no one knew, was able to come into the government, get enough people to pass this bill. And there was so much in it that was not communicated at all to the people. Because of that, the legislator felt, okay, 1994, let's do an initiative that we have only a single subject every time when there's an amendment to the state constitution. So now, if we want to do an amendment to TABOR, it would take us to do one thing at a time. So it could be the tax increases that mostly voted on the people. We'd have to address that one issue. That's going to make it extremely hard to repeal the entire part of TABOR. The second thing is Amendment 71 that just passed this past year. And what that means is all 35 state districts, to get on the ballot, you have to have so many signatures from Coloradans. Now you have to have 2% of each district to sign off on that ballot. So it would take rural communities, urban communities, everywhere, we'd have to get signatures from everyone. As well as, instead of 51%, it's now 55% that you need to pass. So it'd be extremely hard to get this passed, but in conclusion, I guess what I would say is that if we educate people and tell them, like we're doing now, this is a chance that we can actually make a difference. The problem is there's still, even after you've heard all this in the presentation, so many people who love TABOR. They just think it is the bee's knees, and there is people going around trying to get it passed at every single state. There's actually a coalition for that. Ridiculous. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to say a few fun facts. I have a few minutes left. Douglas Bruce, I could give an entire presentation on Douglas Bruce. And there's actually an hour-and-a-half podcast on Colorado Public Radio called The Tax Man. They also have a whole website. It's so good. If you're interested by this, like I am, just please go check it out. It's so good. But some fun facts is that he felt like, I'm a citizen. I'm really involved in politics. I'm going to go from the inside. And so he ran for office, and on the day that he got sworn in, he actually kicked a reporter. And while they were taking pictures during the morning prayer, he went over and kicked the reporter, and he's the only man in Colorado to be censured from the state of Colorado legislation. He also is now a convicted felon because in 2011 he got convicted for tax evasion. You guessed it. Yeah, so just irony everywhere. It's wonderful. And in conclusion as well, how it works, remember it's the prior year budget. Actually, we should really say prior year spending plus inflation and population growth is our limit. And finally, if we want to reform this, everyone, it really takes us to educate each other. Tell your neighbors if you feel like this is something that has harmed the state of Colorado and you are someone who's passionate about the services that it brings, you need to tell people that this is happening. Maybe share this Facebook Live video or the YouTube video when it comes out. Quick plug. But overall, we really need to be just as patient, persistent, and loud as Douglas Bruce himself. So the last thing I want to show is that I have this works cited page. I actually put together an entire YouTube playlist of videos. There's about 5 of them, and they're so good. Picked them out myself. They're great. And that's this link right there. Oh, and finally, thank you so much for coming to the presentation. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. Yeah, please.
So are there any other states that have passed something similar to TABOR?
That's a great question. So we are the only state that has ever passed TABOR. It's been presented to about 5 other states, but they've all voted it down. So we are the only state in all of the United States that have done it. Yeah.
There are some entities that have debruced, is that correct?
That have what?
Debruced
Oh, yes.
individually.
Yeah.
And how many are there? Or
Yeah, well, I found a really great white paper from some students that were in CU Boulder. And what they talked about is how local municipalities have been trying to get debrucing initiatives. And what it takes, like I said, is a lot of education to the people. There's been the county of Ouray, they had severe problems where they hit a recession and then they couldn't have any money to do anything. And so they also did a debrucing amendment which allowed them to hold revenue, and I want to say that it was indefinite, that they're able now, because they passed that forever they are able to retain those revenues.
So because of the population growth in Colorado right now, is that helping increase the spending at all?
Yeah, so because of the equation, it really does help, but it doesn't help by much. And because when we hit that lower recession level, we're able to grow a little bit more, but that excess, wherever the economy is at, all of that still gets refunded back to the taxpayers. So the real problem is if we can hold that money, we could really give some more public goods to the people. So.
do you know how the money has been refunded?
Like the process of how it's been refunded. I was really trying to find as well, like over the years, how much to each person, because that'd be so interesting. But what it looks like is in your tax return, you're able to get a certain amount back. It's a line on your Colorado tax return that gives you that amount. So there's $54, $62. It's always dependent on how much money was in excess from the previous year.
When you get voted into office, you're going to get rid of TABOR.
That would be, this entire presentation has really made me realize that this would be something that I'm so passionate about. I love Colorado, and I love legislative affairs, I love tax law, And if I can go in there and take this down one piece at a time, that would be something that I can give back to the people in my community. So hopefully one day. Yeah. Well, if there is any, it's been such a pleasure to learn more about this. So I put my email on here. I also put my Instagram, so follow me. But I put my email on here. I could send you my presentation or anything else. If you want to talk about it, we could talk about it. That would be great. Thank you guys.
Thanks, John.